millennials, if you ask people to think about 5 years, they think it is too far. They ask you, will I be alive in 5 years? We Africans sometimes believe that we must plant the tree and enjoy her fruits. No, we cannot. Wisdom has demonstrated not once, not twice, that those who plant the tree must and indeed never eat the fruit. Their joy is in planting the tree, that history may remember them. And I'm submitting to us that we must decolonize our mind. Kenya's Ngugi wa Thiong'o was right, that it is the decolonization of our minds that will be the beginning of our proper appreciation of where we want to go. What do I mean, decolonizing the mind? We must recognize that we live in a global world, that we cannot escape. We must recognize that we are going to relate with other civilizations, that we cannot escape. We must recognize that we are going to work with the Chinese, with the English, with the French, with the Americans, with the Indians, and with the Arabs, and that if we do not work smart, they will outsmart us. Because everybody does what is in their best interest. Has Africa defined what is in her best interest? I'm submitting that we have not. If we have defined it very narrowly as Tanzanians. But what is Tanzania in the scheme of things? What is the economic power of Tanzania in the scheme of things? At the very best, the GDP of Tanzania last year must be below 50 billion United States dollars. I am quite certain that one of the big boxers in the United States of America can earn that in a year. What is the economy of Kenya in the scheme of things at $60 billion, or Burundi or Togo? Perhaps the advertisement budget of Coca-Cola is bigger than the budget of all East African countries combined. That is the truth. Because I'm submitting to you that the Indian economy alone is bigger than all the economies of African countries combined. India alone. Brazil's economy alone is bigger than all our countries combined. That is why you see when the Chinese president invites African president, all of them, without exception, run to Beijing very quickly. And when they get to Beijing, they are given $60 billion, all of them, the 55 of them, to share. And I ask myself, why don't you ask Nigeria's Aliko Dangote? You don't have to move. Aliko will give you 60 billion. He has it. And if he doesn't have it, you ask Patrick Motsepe from South Africa to add a little more. And if you didn't ask him, and may his soul rest in peace before he passed on, you asked Reginald Mengi here to add a little more. He could. And if it is not much, there is no shortage of Africans who can give you that money, because there is no free lunch. Because nobody does anything in this cutthroat world where throats are actually cut without having an interest. I'm submitting that in order for Africa to grow, it is we who have gone to school who must ask ourselves, what kind of schools did we go to? Is that great Nigerian singer, Fela Kuti, who used to sing in a song that I remind us about, "Teacher, don't teach me nonsense." Perhaps we were taught nonsense. And there is a need to unlearn some of the things that we learned. We have to inspect ourselves, because we who have gone to some kind of formal education in different parts of the world, in our unguarded moments, when you are colonized by the French and you are bragging about your child, you'll hear saying, "My child has been admitted at the Sorbonne," if you are from Senegal. But when he's been admitted at the Cheikh Diop University, you don't even say it, because you think instinctively that the Sorbonne is superior. You should hear East Africans and former colonies talking how their children are going to the Ivy League school, not the University of Dar es Salaam. We must decolonize our minds, Because the day we decolonize our mind, that is the day we begin to think right. Number two, we must define ourselves. Africa does not define herself. You know, I remember in 1989 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And it then meant that all the countries that had one-party states had to move into multi-party states. We were told by the conceptual West, and when I talk about the conceptual West, I'm including Australia, those countries that are geographically not in the West. They were telling us through their NGOs, and there is no shortage of them, that democracy means, democracy defined by Europe and America, means that you must have multi-party states, and we formed them in the hundreds. Go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. They have 233 political parties. So that if you are looking at the ballot paper in the Democratic Republic of Congo, it is as tall as you are. Or as long as you are tall, to speak correct English. Then we were told that democracy means that we must have elections every 5 years. And democracy means that the European Union and some other Western agency must come in and observe us and say that you little fellows, you have done a good job. That is effectively what they do. Once they have done that, then they print papers which says, now this is the index of democracy, and we are very happy because Europe and America have told us we are democratic. Not the woman in Butiama. The woman in Butiama has not told us we are democratic. It's Europe and America. It's Paris and Washington. We must define ourselves. But when they are telling Africans that, they don't tell Kuwait that. No, they don't. They don't tell Singapore that. No. They don't tell Saudi Arabia that. That is staple for the African. It is the Africans who must be told what to do, because he is incapable of knowing what he does. We must define ourselves. Who tells us that democracy must be defined by Europe and America? Can't we define our own democracy? Did we not have our forms and systems of governance before we were colonized? Isn't there merit in asking ourselves whether those systems can work better for us? Because experience has now shown that after every other election in Africa, almost the rule is we fight. Perhaps if we redefine ourselves, we'll begin to appreciate what it is that we must do going forward in order to unite. And in the Pan-African spirit, we will be able to recognize that our unity is our salvation. And that is why I'm happy that the African Union has now come up with Africa Agenda 2063. But Africa Agenda 2063 could be one of the pronouncements that we make as a continent. Agenda 2063 says, not in so many words, but in effect, that by the year 2063, Africa will have changed. We'll be economically vibrant. There will possibly be an electric train running from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to Dakar in Senegal, and one from Luanda in Angola to Swakien in Sudan, and another one from Cape Town in South Africa to Tunis in Tunisia, and that the entire basin of the Rift of the Democratic Republic of Congo will be better than the Silicon Valley, and that we will be trading with each other about 60%. That is Africa Agenda 2063. And one of the things that they promised themselves and ourselves last year is that by the year 2020, all the guns in Africa will be silent. That is next year. Next year, there'll be no more guns. A good thing, but you and me know that the guns are roaring even louder, which means that we must now ask ourselves what it is that we must do. But it's a good beginning, because it is a beginning of defining ourselves and defining who we are. Because let me tell you, and I don't blame the Chinese, But I worry about them and about us. Today, in any African country, notwithstanding that over the years, our universities have produced professionals, the Chinese are the ones building our stadia. I do not know whether the stadium here in Dar es Salaam was built by Tanzanians. You will tell me. I need to be educated. But I suspect that there was a Chinese hand. If you go to Nairobi, Kenya is the same. You go to any country, to Uganda, the same. And the Chinese are now, in a very subtle way, in every other African university, they are bringing something called the Confucius Institute. Educate me. At the University of Nairobi, there is one. In Makerere, there is one. In Zambia, there is one. My brethren Tanzanians, tell me, do you have one here? There is no free lunch. The Chinese have recognized that the mind is the standard of the man. And therefore, the way to capture our minds is to have institutes in our highest institutions of learning. Once you capture the minds of their very best, then you've captured them. In 100 years' time, we'll be wondering how they did it. This is how they did it. This is how they did, and I don't blame them one iota. If we were organized as Africans, we would be having the African institutes in each universities where we would teach comparative culture. Today, a number of countries are adopting Mandarin as the language of choice. We are surrendering to the dominant Chinese culture. And we are wondering how we will be a Pan-African. We are losing the war. We are losing it. The Chinese know what they want, and they must be celebrated and praised for it. Because any civilization that knows what they want will always reach their destination. Do we know what we want? We don't. We must, in the nature of things, restructure our universities. Time has come that we must ask ourselves, what are we teaching at our universities? What are we teaching? If it is in engineering, you go to many engineering schools in Africa and look at the equipment that is being used. Perhaps in some universities, the equipment should be in the museum alongside the spinning wheel. At a time when people are talking about nanotechnology and 5G, you go to typical African university, we're still using blackboard and chalk. And others are teaching differently, yet we think we are going to compete. We are not going to compete. Right now, people are talking about 5G. But what are we Africans doing? We are watching and observing and celebrating as if we are watching a football match between the United States of America and China, asking which one will win? Because the winner is the one that will conquer us again. It's painful but true. We are not there. We are not in the arena. As the saying goes, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy the ticket, and we have not bought the ticket. No amount of prayer and fasting is going to help us. We can pray and fast all we want, but God is not a magician. God tells you, go ye and subdue the world. We are not subduing the world. The world is subduing us. So what are we teaching? We must begin to think differently for the Pan-African project to succeed. We must begin to act as one unit. Recently in Mozambique, Mother Nature devastated the city of Beira. 90% of it was destroyed. The city of Beira, 90% gone. I waited for Africans to say that we are going to donate 1% of our budget. It is only Namibia and South Africa, and to a certain extent Kenya and a few other countries that went there. But the following week, there was a church in Notre Dame in Paris that burned, and within 1 week, they had raised 1 billion. In fact, more, I think, or approaching 1 trillion, including a donation from a traditional chief in Côte d'Ivoire, who was very devastated that one of his brothers or somebody related to him had been baptized at the church in Notre Dame. If you now go to Beira, it is not African engineers who are involved in restoring, or African professionals. You will discover that some Portuguese firm, possibly, and some Chinese firm are the ones who are involved. Africa is now in the business of discovering natural gas and oil. Who is exploiting that oil? If it is not tallow, it is Elf. If it is not Elf, it is ExxonMobil. If it is not ExxonMobil, it is Total. Africa, Ali Mazrui was right, produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. We know, but we must remind ourselves, because sometimes we sit pretty and think that everything is fine. Everything is not fine. You are here. Allow me to be morbid. In 100 years' time, all of you will be upstairs. All of you. Without exception. All of you. But I want you to imagine for one moment how Africa will be. You know, some times ago, the Chinese, and I'm on the Chinese because I'm seeing them. I never saw the white man coming. I was too young or unborn. But this one I can see. The Chinese had a policy of only 1 child. Then suddenly they said, we are now allowing couples to have a 2nd child. That 2nd child is going to be here. That 2nd child is the child that is going to conquer us if we are not organized. I do not know, but when I travel across the continent of Africa, I see Chinese very quiet, and African middle class is happiest when they go to a Chinese restaurant on Saturday. We are going for Chinese dinner. It is a statement of how sophisticated we are. I'm submitting to us that we must do something about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Africa can be great, and Africa must be great, but we must begin to do something about it. The question is, what are we doing? The problem that some of us have is that we feel helpless. We hold the view that we are not in political positions, and therefore we cannot influence processes. My good friend Pole Pole is here, and he is a politician whom I know. The question is, what must you do within your systems in the political arena to begin to energize processes? One must ask, for example, here in the East African region, what are we doing to ensure that in this region we think as one? I fly from Nairobi 1 hour, 5 minutes, and I now have to grapple with Tanzanian shilling. My Kenyan shilling becomes suddenly useless. I leave Tanzania, I go to Burundi, I grapple with the Burundian franc. I leave Burundi, I grapple with the French, with the Rwandese franc. I go to Uganda, I'm grappling with the Ugandan shilling. I move upstairs, I'm dealing with the pound. I move to Angola, I'm dealing with the kwanza. 55, almost 50 currencies, which are effectively useless. Because even the leaders don't believe in them. When the Sudanese head of state is arrested and they search his house, you don't find the Sudanese pound. You find the American dollar. And you find the euro. We also don't have faith in our own currencies. And our currencies are going to remain weak as long as we are not united. So in the East African region, what can we do? I travel and I get to Julius Kambarage International Airport, and I'm told very politely, as is the culture in Tanzania, jaza fomu ya kuingia. And I obey. But should I, after flying for 1 hour, 5 minutes, an American will fly from Boston in Massachusetts to Oakland in California, 6 hours later, no forms filled, no yellow fever certificate, no passport, no new telephone number. The country works. Here, I'm now in 255, having migrated from 254. I'm dealing with Tigo, and even Tigo is not Tanzania. I'm dealing with Airtel, even Airtel is not Tanzania. I'm dealing with Vodafone. We own nothing. Pole pole. But if we are East Africa, we can begin to own things. When we begin to negotiate as East Africa and we negotiate with the EU, we begin to make sense to them. But if we are alone, somebody was telling me that African economies are growing, and I told them, yes, they are growing. But no matter how fast a goat grows, it can only be a fat goat, it can't be a cow. So what we must do is that we must combine all these little goats into a big elephant, and we'll begin to make sense. Kwame Nkrumah, may he rest in peace. How relevant you are 56 years ago today, when you spoke on that day in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and reminded us that Africa had to unite. If today I were to write, as Nkosana and Lamini Zuma wrote in the year 2013, if today I were to write a letter to our founding fathers who died several years ago, this is how the letter would read. I would not name all of them, but I would name the following. I would say, Dear Kwame Nkrumah, Dear Kambarage Nyerere, Dear Patrice Emery Lumumba, Dear Modibo Keita, Dear Ahmed Sekou Touré, Dear Thomas Sankara, dear Nelson Holisa Mandela, we are gathered here today in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, on this 25th day of May in 2019. And we are pretending to be discussing a new subject, but we are not. In fact, my dear fathers, we are discussing something that you discussed 56 years ago. And we are now recognizing that you warned us that if we did not unite, we will be conquered again. I am sadly reporting to you that we are being conquered again. We are being conquered again in the manner that you feared, and I'm now telling you that this time round our conquest is a little more subtle. I am telling you, Osagyefo, that now, although in 1961 you had created the University of Ghana at Legon, and you had also created the University of Science and Technology, in many African universities we are now accommodating Confucius Institutes. Osagyefo, we do not know what they are going to teach there in 100 years' time. But for the moment, they tell us is aid and that they like us. But Osagyefo, I agree with you, there is no free lunch. We are also sitting here today in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, the home of your brother, Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And we also are reminding ourselves that Nyerere came up with a philosophy called Ujamaa, which was self-reliance. We can now tell you that in substance, Mwalimu was right. But unfortunately, we are still importing things from Europe. We now have mobile phones, which you did not have when you were alive. But unfortunately, Mwalimu, those mobile phones, none of them is made in Africa. Last week, we saw an attempt by somebody to claim that one was made in Rwanda, but I suspect it was only assembled in Rwanda. Mwalimu, we are trying. I can now also confirm to you that we have many political parties, just as you feared Osagyefo. In Congo, there are 233. But Congo is not at peace. In Tanzania, they don't have very many, but I can assure you CCM is still doing very well. But Tanzania is the exception rather than the rule. After every election, Mwalimu, we fight. In Kenya, we did. Then we shake hands. Then we fight. Then we shake them again. We are in the business of shaking hands. In Central Africa, we are fighting. Our young men and women are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. We now know you are right. And therefore, going forward, we are today taking a solemn vow that each one of us will use the resources at our disposal, and that we are going as a product of this conference to send a paper which will emanate out of Julius Kambarage Festival, which paper will be sent to the African Union. And that paper will tell the African Union that there is a sense of urgency. And it will not stop there. That paper will also be sent to all the 55 African heads of state, reminding them that there is need for Africa to trade with ourselves, that there is need for Africans to travel on one visa, that there is need for Africans to have one currency, that there is need for Africans to define ourselves. And Osagyefo, I remind you, I remember during your lifetime, you hosted both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. And I am reminded that at one time he was asking his people in the United States of America how long it would take to unite Africa. We are now telling you that it's not too long. It is not going to be long, because young men and women are now telling us that we unite or we perish. Osagyefo, Mwalimu, Seko, I would have written a longer letter, but I can now see that my audience wants to go for lunch. Permit me, therefore, to stop here in the knowledge that Pan-Africanism is alive and well, and Africa will realize our potential even if it takes 100 years. God bless you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that standing ovation says it all. He came and he delivered. But he assures me he has got some time to respond to some questions, some comments, or other views. So please, you are welcome. Please say, identify yourself, where you come from, and be brief, because you can see we are so many of us, and I'm sure many would want also to have a word. Kwa hiyo karibu sana. Okay, let me, let me start with Aziz Fall.
I will be very brief. I am Aziz Fall, Secretary General of the Pan-Africanist Federalist Movement. Tomorrow, we're going to celebrate. As we just heard, maybe we should not celebrate. because we're supposed to celebrate our liberation. The analysis that was made was highlighted by different reports. Today, we have foreign military bases, we have plundering of our resources. But at the Pan-Africanist Federalist Movement, we are absolutely confident that within a generation, we're going to fast-track the movement. Within the next year, all African nations where we have section will start a process of referendum in order to fast-track all the ratification that the states have agreed on the union government and the process. We know it's going to be hard, and I simply give you a simple example. To come to Tanzania, a dream come true after all my teenage, I had to pay a visa, 6 weeks, and pay $350. Next time I will come to Tanzania, I will not have a visa. Tomorrow, and I beg you, all of you, let us celebrate and analyze the situation. I have come to convey the message of the movement, because we know that it is here that the first federation in the continent succeeded. But it is also here that the war on terror started. So Tanzania is for us the place where we have to learn. This generation, and I'm talking to this generation, in 20 years, if we start at the age of 5 in every country, we will speak Swahili in the whole African continent. So tomorrow afternoon, please, let us celebrate. Whether we have an audience, whether we stand in the tree, please let us share the strategy. And I would like to have the eloquence of Professor Lumumba and all the people who were kind enough to invite me to watch the film AFRICOM Go Home, Foreign Bases Out of Africa, which portrayed the emergency, the urgency of speeding and fast-tracking the process. Everything is already invented. We just have to implement, and this generation will do it. Thank you.
Okay.